Welcome to Daily English Stories. Every story hides a world. Some inspire, some haunt, some stay forever. Chapter 1. Above them all. Daniel always walked with his chin slightly raised, as though the world itself needed his permission to exist. He was the top of his class, not just in grades, but in presence. Every word he spoke carried weight. Every answer he gave made teachers nod in reluctant admiration. His uniform was always perfectly pressed. His shoes shined like mirrors. While others stumbled through adolescence, Daniel floated, untouched, unaffected. To most, he was the boy who had it all: intelligence, confidence, charm. But to those who knew better or tried to, he was cold, distant, wrapped in a thick layer of self-importance. He didn't just answer questions. He corrected teachers. He didn't just win debates. He humiliated opponents. If someone made a mistake, Daniel didn't help. He smirked. If someone was shy, he didn't encourage. He ignored. In the corridors, students stepped aside when he passed. Not out of respect, but out of caution. They had learned that one wrong word could turn them into the subject of his casual sarcasm. He wasn't cruel in the traditional sense. He never shouted or fought. But the way he spoke, with that sharp smile and cool gaze, it was enough to make people feel small. The janitor, Mr. Wallace, always greeted Daniel warmly. "Good morning, son." Daniel never responded. To him, a man pushing a mop had no place in his world. Teachers often hesitated when correcting his assignments, unsure if they'd misunderstood or if Daniel had outsmarted them again. And his classmates, especially the quiet ones, rarely dared to raise their hands in his presence. He made them feel as though mistakes were crimes. Praise was his fuel. Every compliment, every trophy, every nod of approval made him walk a little taller. But kindness, that made him uneasy. When someone offered help, he recoiled. When someone showed concern, he dismissed it. Vulnerability was foreign to him, something he'd been taught to avoid, because weakness, in his eyes, was the opposite of success. At home, things were just as polished. His father was a successful businessman, always dressed in tailored suits. His mother, graceful and elegant, ran charity events and hosted dinners where perfection was expected. Emotions weren't expressed, struggles weren't discussed. Daniel learned early that achievement earned affection, and anything less was quietly overlooked. He was admired, envied, even feared, but never loved. Not truly, not deeply. Not in the way that made a person feel safe just by being themselves. He couldn't remember the last time someone asked how he really felt. He wasn't even sure he'd know how to answer. But there were nights, long after the lights were out, when he stared at the ceiling and felt something gnaw at him. A restlessness, an ache, a question he didn't know how to ask. Daniel didn't know what it was he lacked. But in the silence, beyond all the applause, he felt it. Something was missing. Chapter 2. The Fall. Daniel had always walked through the school hallways with an air of unshakable confidence. Shoulders straight, steps measured, never in a hurry. His clothes were tailored, his backpack sleek, and his answers in class sharp enough to draw nods from even the strictest teachers. He was admired, envied, sometimes feared, but never pitied. Then came the fall. It began with whispers at home, soft, tense conversations behind closed doors. Daniel heard fragments: downsizing, severance, market crash. His father, once a regional manager with a firm handshake and a commanding voice, started coming home earlier. Then, not at all. His mother spoke less. The laughter at dinner faded into the clink of silverware and long silences. Soon after, bills arrived more often than deliveries. The internet was cut off for a few days, then the cable, then the help. Daniel noticed his shoes beginning to wear at the edges, the fabric of his blazer thinning. But he still ironed them every morning, still walked tall. At school, rumors spread like wildfire. Did you hear? Daniel's dad lost his job. They might move. He doesn't even eat lunch anymore. The boy who once corrected teachers and scoffed at late homework now sat quieter in class, avoiding eye contact. The ones he once called average didn't look at him anymore. Their silence wasn't cruel. It was indifferent. That hurt more. He tried to maintain the illusion. When friends asked if everything was okay, he laughed. Just tired, he'd say, though sleep escaped him most nights. Pride held his mouth shut, even when his stomach growled. He no longer rolled his eyes at the janitor, but not because he had changed. He simply didn't have the energy to. And then, on a rainy Tuesday, something unexpected happened. Daniel stood by his locker, struggling to hide the tear in his sleeve, when a soft voice spoke behind him. I brought an extra sandwich. You want it? It was Mia, the girl he'd once ignored, whose presentations he barely listened to. She offered it like it was nothing. No pity in her eyes, no smirk, just quiet kindness. He hesitated. Everything inside him screamed to decline. But his hands trembled as they reached out. Thanks, he whispered. That small act unlocked something in his world. The next day, Ahmed, the quiet kid from physics, shared his notes without being asked. A teacher gave him an extension on an assignment and didn't announce it in front of the class. The janitor, Mr. Ellis, whom Daniel never truly noticed, gave him a nod and a warm, "Hang in there, son." These moments weren't loud or grand. They were simple, human, and they began to soften him. He sat alone in the library one afternoon, staring at his reflection in the dark screen of an unplugged computer. He didn't look so polished anymore. But for the first time, he saw himself. Not the perfect student, not the arrogant achiever, but a boy who had fallen and hadn't shattered. Something within him stirred, a quiet understanding. The very people he had once overlooked now held him up with invisible hands. Their kindness didn't feel like charity. It felt like grace. And though he hadn't said it out loud yet, something inside Daniel began to change. Chapter 3. A different kind of strength change didn't arrive like a thunderclap in Daniel's life. It crept in quietly, like morning light easing through curtains after a long, stormy night. He didn't wake up a new person one day. He simply began to notice things. Small, human things he had always overlooked. The boy who sat in the corner of the classroom, the one Daniel used to think was slow, turned out to be incredibly kind. When Daniel dropped his books in the hallway one day, that same boy knelt to help him, without hesitation or a smirk. Daniel muttered a surprised, "Thanks." It felt strange coming out of his mouth, like dusting off a word he hadn't used in years. But it stuck. That week, he noticed the janitor wiping the same spot on the hallway floor every morning, not because it was dirty, but because he wanted it to shine. Daniel paused to say good morning. The janitor looked up surprised. For a moment, neither of them knew what to say. But from the next day on, Daniel always greeted him with a smile, and the janitor smiled back. One afternoon, Daniel saw a younger student being teased for stuttering during a class presentation. In the past, he might have rolled his eyes, maybe even laughed along just to keep up appearances. But this time, he stood up. "He's trying," Daniel said firmly, looking around the room. "That counts for something." There was silence, then slow nods. The teasing stopped. Daniel began volunteering after school, not out of obligation, but because it felt right. He helped organize books in the library. He assisted a teacher in tutoring kids who were struggling. He even helped serve lunch once, standing side by side with the cafeteria staff he used to ignore. One day, he sat with the janitor during lunch. They shared stories, simple ones, about family, about music, about how hard work never ends, but always matters. Daniel laughed more than he had in weeks. It was honest, unpolished laughter, not the smug kind that once curled on his lips. The janitor didn't care about Daniel's grades or his awards. He cared about his heart. And somehow, Daniel knew that was the first time someone really saw him. At home, things were still tough. His father was trying to find a job, and the house echoed more now that comfort had left. But Daniel didn't hide in his room anymore. He helped his mother cook. He sat with his father in silence on hard days. He listened when they talked. And sometimes he cried quietly in bed, but no longer from shame. These were tears that washed away the boy he used to be. When Daniel walked through the halls now, he didn't walk ahead of others. He walked beside them. His brilliance hadn't dimmed. It simply stopped blinding. It lit up those around him, too. There was a moment, weeks later, when a teacher read an essay Daniel had written aloud in class. It was heartfelt, reflective, and full of humility. The students listened, silent and attentive. When she finished, the room burst into soft applause. Daniel looked down, not out of false modesty, but genuine emotion. He smiled, not the smirk of the old Daniel, but a quiet, warm smile of someone who had seen himself clearly for the first time. Later that day, a younger student approached him shyly and said, "I want to write like you someday." Daniel placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You will. Just keep going." It wasn't about being the best anymore. It was about being better, more human, more kind, more real. Daniel no longer stood above others. He stood with them. And that, he finally understood, was the strongest place he could ever be.